Hey up all, I'm Propagandist, and welcome back to some more Gallant and Panzer related content. Now, with part 2 of Das Finale currently in the works, I was reflecting on all the different types of fighting vehicle that we've ever seen fielded in the Gallant and Panzer franchise, and this got me thinking about some content that I could actually do here on Propagandist. Something not just about Gallant and Panzer, but a bit of a history lesson that's using GUP as its inspiration. So here I am, presenting you with my Gallant and Panzer 5 historically significant tanks checklist. In this video, I'm going to be discussing 5 tanks that have appeared at various points in the GUP franchise, which, in real life, were historically significant designs. Now, please note, this is not simply a list of 5 tanks which performed amazingly, or 5 best tanks in history or whatever. This is a list of 5 tanks that were historically significant for various reasons, which will be explained over the course of this video. Now obviously this is all just my opinion. If there are tanks which I don't mention in this video but which you feel were worth kind of mentioning, then feel free to let me know in the comments and we can have a discussion about them. Also, it's important to note that the following, which I'm about to go through, these are not ranked in any particular order. I've just kind of thrown this list together. So without further ado, let's get to it. Number 1. British Mark IV, as used by Shark Team. First appearing in Das Finale Chapter 1 as ORI's 9th tank, operated by the pirate-themed Shark Team, the Mark IV is by far one of the oldest types of tank to have yet appeared in Gallant and Panzer. It should be pretty obvious why I've chosen to put this one on the list. Putting aside its armament and armour and mobility specifications, the Mark IV was undoubtedly a historically significant design, simply because it was the most numerous British tank of World War I, and it benefited from improvements on the original Mark I. Its combat record in World War I was admittedly somewhat mixed. On dry ground, such as at Messines Ridge in 1917, it did show promise, even if it sometimes had a tendency to lag behind the infantry. At Cambrai, a combined effort between British infantry, artillery, aircraft and Mark IV tanks gave something of an early blueprint as to how tanks could be used effectively in coordination with other military assets. But at other battles where the terrain was swampier, such as at Passchendaele, also in 1917, Mark IVs did have a tendency to become bogged down, and were thus sitting ducks for the German artillery. Regardless of its combat record, however, the Mark IV remains a historically significant machine worthy of this list, simply because it was one of the more notable steps in the early history of tank design. Number 2. French Renault FT, as used by BC Freedom Academy. Also first appearing in Das Finale Chapter 1, this time as the flag tank of BC Freedom Academy, the Renault FT is another of Gallant and Panzer's oldest featured tanks. In real life, this French tank was designed and first fielded in the closing years of World War I. Now, whilst the British may have been the ones remembered for the initial foray into tank warfare, it is the French who take the award for subsequently pioneering the advancement of tank design. The Renault FT's significance is that it was the first turreted production tank design in history, establishing the model of tank design that all tanks have adhered to right to the present. This was in contrast to other tanks of the day, such as the previously mentioned Mark IV, which carried its weapons in side-mounted sponsons rather than a rotating roof-mounted turret. Now the Renault FT had its weapons, like I say, mounted in that rotating turret, giving it a degree of flexibility that other tanks at the time of its development simply did not possess. Unlike tanks such as the Mark IV, the guns of which had a limited arc of fire thanks to being mounted in side sponsons, thus requiring a greater level of coordination between the driver and the gunners in order to ensure the tank was facing a direction that allowed it to hit the enemy, the Renault FT on the other hand, because it had that turreted design, it meant that the tank's body did not have to face the enemy to be able to shoot at them, just the turret needed to be facing them. This might seem like such a small detail, but it's actually a pretty major advancement. Not only, however, did the Renault FT have a turret, its overall layout also left a lasting legacy. The crew compartment was located to the front of the vehicle, whilst the engine compartment was to the rear, and this is significant because it remains the standard tank layout today, a further testament to the historical significance of the Renault FT. Number 3. British Centurion, as used by Alice Shimada. Featured in the Girls and Panzer movie, Der Film, the Centurion was the tank used by Alice Shimada in the Annihilation battle against Miho and her friends. The historical significance of the Centurion can be summarised as follows. It was the first true main battle tank in history, a design which spawned many variants and saw action throughout the Cold War. Now, prior to the Cold War, many states had used the old distinction of light, medium and heavy when designing tanks, each category meant for specific roles. Light, for instance, was often best for reconnaissance and infantry support, heavy for breakthrough operations where sheer firepower was required, and medium was often seen as a compromise between the two. But with the dawn of the Cold War, a shift away from this old system of classifying tanks began to occur. The Centurion represented what we'd now call the first true main or universal battle tank, a tank that unites the firepower and armour protection of the heavy with the weight of the medium and the mobility of the light. Today, of course, most militaries around the world field some form of universal battle tank as the main component of their armoured forces, with lighter specialist vehicles for support. The Centurion can therefore be seen as a tank that began this process. But more than that, the Centurion has also left a visible legacy. Even today, the Centurion chassis is still used in some states, such as Israel, as a basis for armoured personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles and engineering vehicles. It is for all of these reasons that the Centurion has been included on this list of historically significant tanks that appear in Girls and Panzer. Number 4. Soviet T-34, as used by Pravda. Seen in the original TV series, the T-34s make up the bulk of Soviet-themed Pravda High School's Panzer team. In real life, the T-34 was the second most produced tank of all time, and one which is widely seen as having had a notably significant influence on tank design. Now, there's not really much for me to say about this because it's such an iconic tank, but to sum it up in brief, T-34s, despite some early teething problems in their development and operational history, did come to be regarded as a perfect combination of firepower, mobility and sloped armour protection. Though of course they would be surpassed later in the war by successive tank designs, it did have a lasting legacy. Even as of the present day, there is still a minority of countries fielding these vehicles, and looking back on history, the T-34 is seen as an icon of Soviet armoured firepower. Number 5. The American M4 Sherman, as used by Saunders. Lastly, also seen in the original TV series was the American M4 Sherman, the tank utilised in large numbers by the US-themed Saunders team. Now, I know that the M4 Sherman is often a hotly debated tank in discussions about how it compares to other armoured vehicles of World War II. Against some enemy armour, such as Japanese tanks in the Pacific theatre, it was undoubtedly superior. But of course, as the war progressed on the European front, Shermans would come to be challenged by the development of tanks such as the German Panthers and Tigers. Whilst not the most amazing tank when you consider its specifications, I've included this one because it imparts an important lesson for tank designers and wartime planners: simplicity. Shermans could be manufactured in huge numbers because they were simpler in their design than their foreign counterparts. Replacement parts could also be produced and distributed quickly if they were needed. It can therefore be seen as a triumph of logistics, and logistics of course is an absolutely crucial and sometimes underappreciated element of any war. And ultimately, it can be seen as a verification of the idea that in a total conventional war, the side with the strongest, most resilient economy and industrial base holds a huge advantage. The Sherman, in my eyes, exemplified the strength conveyed to the Western Allied side when the US entered the war: economic and industrial capability. This is why the M4 Sherman has been included on my list of 5 historically significant tanks featured in Girls and Panzer, irrespective of debates over its comparative strengths and weaknesses in regards to foreign counterparts. So thank you everybody for joining me for this brief list of my 5 most historically significant tanks featured in Girls und Panzer. I hope you've enjoyed this, and if there are any other tanks you felt were worthy of discussion which I didn't mention here, feel free to let me know in the comments. We can have a good old chat over them. But in the meantime, of course, once again, thank you for watching and I hope you enjoyed. If you're not aware, General Red Propagandist is my second channel. My main channel is General Red Strategist, where I do a lot of gaming content, so if you're interested in that kind of thing, it might be worth checking out. You can find a link to it below in the video description. If you enjoyed the video, of course, do leave a like and do share it with your friends on Facebook, on Twitter, whatever social media pages you may be signed up to. But in the meantime, thank you then everybody for joining me. Hope you'll join me again for another video here on Propagandist, whenever that may be. And in the meantime, goodbye everybody.